Trump was in a separate federal courtroom where he's trying to fend off a trial that could result in his incarceration. A lot going on. At the Fox News town hall last night, that came up. Trump tried to downplay many of the different things he's done before, during, and after January 6th, including threats designed to rattle the system or poison the jury pool or scare people in government, where he's vowed retribution. And so I want to show you something tonight. If you followed our coverage last night, Rachel, and our whole team broke some of this down, we talked about it, we reported on it. Right now, I'm going to let the evidence do the talking and show you a contrast that we've prepared for tonight's coverage, which is what Donald Trump was saying in his softer, allegedly gentler, walk-back version at the Fox town hall, and what he has actually repeatedly said and what his lawyers have helped defend and argue for on the other side of the ledger. Because Donald Trump is both good cop on Fox and bad cop in a lot of other places, all wrapped into one hypocritical, self-contradictory package.
I'm not going to have time for retribution. I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? And remember this, our ultimate retribution is success.
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
No. I am not going to be a dictator.
We will treat those people from January 6th fairly. We will treat them fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons.
So can you say tonight that political violence is never acceptable?
Well, of course that's right.
Knock the crap out of him, would you? Seriously.
It tells the story. And as we were discussing just with Rachel and others last night, the story is actually more complicated than the cartoonish narrative we sometimes hear. You may have heard people say, well, the Republican agenda is cruelty, or the MAGA folks like January 6th. They embrace it now. And that's a part of the story. But that actually treats all of the conservative voting bloc as a kind of a monolith. And if you're treating a voting bloc as a monolith, you're probably not very accurate or, quite frankly, sophisticated. Because while that exists, and we've covered it extensively, even on Fox, Donald Trump doesn't want to admit his violent agenda, because even Fox viewers, he has figured out, let alone the rest of the country if he makes it to a general election, don't find violence and political violence appealing, or overthrowing the government appealing, or basically wantonly supporting a coup, let alone hypothetical assassination, appealing. You kind of get lost sometimes. You have to remember, none of that stuff is popular in the main with most people. Even though, yes, part of the Republican Party, which involves, yes, tens of millions of people, has kind of supersized and broadened its support for many horrible things. Trump's calls for violence have consequences. The judge overseeing Trump's New York civil fraud trial actually faced a reported bomb threat just hours before the arguments began today. And while that follows a pattern of swatting that has not actually correlated with bombs, it is still designed to rattle everyone. And if not the judge, then his family. And if not his family, then their friends. And you create an environment of that kind of violent fear. Trump and his team traffic in that, even as he denies it on Fox, let alone the version of him you might hear if he becomes the nominee in the general election. We have to take this very seriously. We have to hold it to account. We have to look at the evidence. And Trump's lawyers back this up, as mentioned, with the scandal to end all scandals, except the scandals seem to be endless, where you have a lawyer for the former president of the United States, when asked a very basic question in court by a serious judge about political assassination, which is something in our country's history and something that relates to what Trump's fans were calling for on Jan 6, what they wanted to do to Pence, Pelosi, and others. And now, just so everybody's clear, the position of the former president and his lawyer, the position that he clearly walked away from on Fox, is a license to murder and assassinate with no way to prosecute it in virtually most cases. Here's that moment.
Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
The answer is no. If you want to know how to cover a court, and we've all gone through law school together dealing with the Trump era, what the judge says the answer is what the court considers the answer. No, there's no way to prosecute that. Yes, they want the immunity to assassinate. And the judges are very skeptical of that lawyer and those claims. It is illegal to murder someone, and it is illegal to use the government to try to murder someone, even if you're a member of the government. I don't know why I have to say that, but here we are. Now, that was a judge's hypothetical. But the reality is that hypothetical was served up, of course, in the context of whether or not there will be a trial for Trump's attempted coup and the now convicted sedition and insurrection or not. Will there be a trial this year before the election on that fact? That's one of the biggest questions we face. And so I mentioned this in our coverage, and I want to reiterate it tonight before we turn to some great experts. There's so much noise nowadays, and people repeat anything from what you hear on the internet or Reddit or TikTok, and all of those places have all kinds of people weighing in, and that's great sometimes. Sometimes you have to fact check it. But this was not some pundit or random video musing about something. This is a very serious judge, second highest court in the land, D.C. Court of Appeals. And they're asking this question to check, before we go any further, how serious are these lawyers and their client, the former president, who stands accused of coups, how serious are they about all this and the claims they're making? And the answer was serious enough to admit in a court hearing under penalty of perjury that this includes a license to kill. That is that side. And then there's the other side I mentioned, the fraud trial. A lot going on, which may explain why Donald Trump is bowing out of any pretense of going on the ground in Iowa much and spending many of his days here in the final week before the Iowa caucus in courtrooms.
If a president of the United States does not have immunity, he'll be totally ineffective because he won't be able to do anything, because it will mean he'll be prosecuted, strongly prosecuted perhaps, as soon as he leaves office by the opposing party. So a president of the United States, I'm not talking just me, I'm talking any president, has to have immunity.
Donald Trump on why he thinks there should be a new made-up immunity precedent that currently doesn't exist. We're joined by Christy Greenberg and our friend Dan Alexander, both of whom were in the courtroom at the fraud trial today. And we'll get to the fraud trial. But, Christy, your view on what we've seen in these pretty intense sets of hearings all week and what the president's arguing there.
Well, this idea that if there is no immunity for the president, that it's just open season on political prosecutions, that's just not true. It hasn't been true up until Donald Trump, because Donald Trump engaged in unprecedented crimes. And so this idea that there's no separation, that somehow these are Joe Biden's indictments, of course they're not. It's not even DOJ's necessarily. They have a special counsel who is separate and has his own authority. He went to a grand jury, and the grand jury voted and found that he had there was probable cause to show that he committed crimes. So there are guardrails in place to make sure that there can't be these political prosecutions. Now, will that be the case if Trump were to be elected? You saw in the argument during that hearing, Trump's lawyer get up and say, oh, well, then all bets are off. Western District of Texas, Biden could be charged for mismanaging the border, which is not a crime. But, you know, he was very much forecasting what Trump would do in office. He said there would be cycles of recrimination that would shake our republic. This wasn't a Truth Social post. This wasn't something they said at a campaign rally. So
why do you think the lawyer legally did such a poor job? Is it just pleasing the client?
I went to law school with him. He was in my section, and it brought back some memories.
Meaning what?
Meaning
he was always like this?
He doesn't really. He wouldn't answer the question. He kind of talk over a professor a bit. I think that's kind of his style. But I mean,
let's slow down. When they say, the judge says, well, we've established that your answer is no, and he says qualified yes, right? And this is just one hearing. You know, imagine if, take him out of it. Imagine if you had a relationship with someone where, you know, you said, did you pick up the kids from school? And he says, well, qualified, yes, but the kids are still at school. I mean, this isn't a very effective tactic, I would say, for answering questions.
Right. Qualified, yes. It was meaningless. I mean, the answer was no to her question.
Well, it was a lie, and I don't think it endeared him to the judge. Now, if he's playing for a different audience, or he's thinking our only hope is the Supreme Court anyway, so I don't even care that I might lose this 3-0. But I'm curious your view on that, and then we're going to turn to the fraud.
I do think, look, Donald Trump was in that hearing, so some of the times where he's raising his voice and talking about political persecution, that was certainly an audience of one. But yes, he is looking forward to the Supreme Court. I don't know that he was particularly concerned about how these three judges, who handled themselves quite well and, asked really probing questions, I don't think he was particularly concerned about how they would receive his responses.
Did you guys ever, square off in a mock trial or anything back in the day?
No, we didn't. No, he was in the Federalist Society. He was, a big textualist, about the Constitution, what's in the text. So to see him taking these positions now that, of course, there's nothing in the text of the Constitution about presidential immunity. There's nothing in the history. So it's very different than the positions he took way back when.
Feel any better? I have already put evac on alert. He's ready to go if it comes to that. General, I can assure you.
Hey, General, let me into the war room to see you, so I had to hack my way onto this frequency.
This better be critical, Wheelie.
Sir, come on, when is it not, please? Okay, couple of things. I'm running low on the dough. I was thinking about taking a couple of months sick leave, maybe starting today. And, oh yeah, I intercepted a transmission from Megatron.
Then send it through.
Yes, sir, right away, sir. And so I'll assume that we're going on the other stuff.
This is your last warning, insects. Relinquish what remains of the Allspark.
So who's the insect? You? What? Who's the insect?
Protect you. They were defeated on our world, and we will defeat them here.
The Megatron.
Ambush was just a diversion. Security teams bring up. Rabbit, she's already inside. Deeds! Give me an update on that reserve. Boss readiness. What was his name?
Evac, sir.
Right, evac.
She's right in front.
We are facing a heavy, sustained attack. They appear to be after the Allspark. General! Need to immediately hold on. National security advisor. Stay down. Check it out. The business operations. The amateurs. Suicide mission.